2. Bank robbers. Separate rooms, no communication. The police don't have enough evidence on either of you, so they offer each of you a deal. Betray your partner and testify against them, you go free, and they get 10 years. If you both stay silent, you each get just 1 year for a minor charge, but if you both betray each other, you both get 5 years. Do you trust your partner enough not to betray you first? The dilemma is soul-crushing. If your partner stays silent, you betray them and walk free. If they betray you, you betray them to avoid 10 years. Betrayal feels like the only logical move. But if you don't trust each other enough, your logic traps both of you in a lose-lose outcome. And this isn't just a crime story. This is a story about game theory. A concept so universal it explains not just this prisoner's dilemma, but hidden principles behind business dilemmas, biology, and even the nuclear arms race that nearly ended the world. In 1949, a WB-29, an American weather monitoring plane, was flying between Japan and Alaska when its filters collected air samples that were alarming. Back at the lab, the results were impossible to ignore. Tests confirmed fresh radioactive isotopes, the fingerprints of a recent nuclear explosion. The United States, the only country in the world that had nuclear weapons at that time, hadn't conducted any test explosions that could explain it. So, the conclusion was what Washington had been fearing. The Soviet Union now had the bomb too. That moment marked the end of American nuclear supremacy and the beginning of a terrifying new era. At the RAND Corporation, which is a US-based think tank, mathematicians and strategists were tasked with solving a problem that felt like a death sentence. They realized that the United States and the Soviets were now locked in a game where every move was dictated by a lack of trust. John von Neumann, a brilliant but cold-blooded key founder of game theory, looked at the board and saw only one logical path: a preemptive strike. He argued that if war was inevitable, it was better to hit them while you still had the advantage. He's often quoted as pushing an extreme logic. If you want to bomb them tomorrow, why not bomb them today?
With the Russians, it is not a question of whether, but of when. If you say why not bomb them tomorrow, I say why not today. If you say today at 5 o'clock, I say why not 1 o'clock.
In that one-sided, isolated decision-making, the math is cruel. No matter what your opponent does, if you don't trust them, your best individual move seems to be to betray them. A thinking pattern so dangerous it could have ended the world. If one side attacked and the other hesitated for even minutes, the responding side could be obliterated. If both sides attacked, they and the world would have suffered catastrophic damage. Mutual mistrust forced both superpowers into an expensive and unnecessary arms race. Over the Cold War, the nuclear arms race consumed trillions of dollars. They built tens of thousands of warheads because they were trapped in a prisoner's dilemma spiral of mistrust. All it could have taken is one wrong move by either side to start a chain reaction. And that one wrong move almost happened. In 1983, a Soviet early warning system falsely detected incoming American missiles. But one man, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, decided not to escalate it as a confirmed attack. His gut overruled the logic and didn't start a chain reaction. It's very possible that we are alive today partially because one person refused to follow the vicious cycle of the mistrust and didn't respond to perceived betrayal with an even bigger physical one. Signals are the language of game theory. In high-stakes games, you can't see your opponent's hand. You can only see what they choose to reveal. To bridge that gap of uncertainty, players use signals. They communicate intent and commitment before the first shot is ever fired. And in the world of potential betrayal, the signal can matter more than the action itself. The Cold War was not just a race for hardware, it was a high-stakes game of posturing, where every warhead parade and nuclear test was a signal designed to communicate strength without having to pull the trigger.
Thus far, the chief purpose of our military establishment has been to win wars. From now on, its chief purpose must be to avert them. It can have almost no other useful purpose.
But signaling doesn't just apply to geopolitics. It's a universal biological mechanism. For example, from a survival standpoint, the peacock's tail is an evolutionary disaster. It's massive, heavy, biologically expensive to grow, but from a game theory standpoint, it is a masterpiece of costly signaling. Because it is a proof of strength.
I am so strong, I have so much energy, and I am so good at surviving that I can afford to drag this ridiculous rug around behind me and still not get eaten.
The whole point is it's expensive to fake. A weak peacock cannot grow a tail that large and thrive or even survive. So the cost makes bluffing much more dangerous, and we humans do this all the time too. Why would someone spend $15,000 on a luxury watch when a $15 one from Temu likely can tell time just as well? Because it signals that they can afford something expensive and inefficient and still thrive. But for a signal to work, it has to be hard to fake. A business can claim they dominate a niche, a nation can lie about its military power, but the system of trust relies on substance, which is usually more difficult to fake. And yet, if you can mimic the signal without paying the price, you can hijack that system of trust. As I discussed in one of my previous videos, Elizabeth Holmes built Theranos into a $9 billion empire. Not on medical breakthroughs, but on signals that were dangerously cheap to produce. The black turtleneck, the Steve Jobs persona, the Stanford dropout story. She realized that if you look like a titan and talk like a titan, people will treat you like a titan.
You know, it's this pastiche, whether it be the turtleneck, the baritone, the swagger, the sense of belief in herself. You're captivated.
She figured out how to look like a costly signal without paying the cost. But she was a fake peacock. She grew a billboard tail she couldn't actually carry, and her entire empire collapsed under the weight of lies she created before the technology proved itself. The moment her signal was proven to be a hollow shell, the $9 billion valuation evaporated, and Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to about 11 years in prison. Prisoners, nuclear threats, peacocks, what's going on here? At first, these disconnected things seem like different stories from different worlds, but they are actually all tied together by one big idea: game theory. Despite the name, this isn't about winning at video games. A game is any time you interact with people, and your success depends on what they choose to do, and their success depends on what you choose.
Sure, that could apply to a game of poker, but it could also apply to practically any situation where people get together and get up in each other's business.
Imagine you are alone in the woods, and trying to survive, you're just playing against nature. But the moment another person shows up, the rules change. Now, every move you make is a calculation. You constantly have to ask yourself, what are they thinking? What do they want? And do you even trust them? But guess what? That same concept applies to the business world too, from small companies to global corporations. Think about two airlines flying the exact same route, say Los Angeles to Toronto. Let's call them Sky Blue and Global Air, and let's say both airlines sell a ticket for $450. At this price, both companies are making a good profit, but then the CEO of Sky Blue looks at the data and sees an opportunity. Why don't we drop the price to $350 and every traveler from Expedia, Google Flights, whatever the platform, will click on our flight first. We'll get all of Global Air's passengers and make a fortune. But this is the same as a betrayal move from the prisoner's dilemma. Sky Blue drops their price for a few days. Their planes are indeed full. It does look like a genius move. But Global Air isn't born yesterday. They have software that tracks Sky Blue's prices every second. To stay in business, they also drop their price to $350. Now both airlines split passengers again, but make $100 less per seat. That's called a Nash equilibrium, a mathematical stalemate and a central concept in game theory. Now, if Sky Blue tries to raise their prices back to $450, they lose all their customers to Global Air. If they drop it even lower, Global Air will follow, and both airlines could start losing money on every flight. Both airlines are in a vicious cycle, and this isn't just theory. In the early 1990s, airlines repeatedly got pulled into brutal competitive cycles. Price wars, thin margins, cost shocks. The several major carriers collapsed, including Pan Am, Midway, and Eastern Airline. This is why game theory is so critical to understand for business owners. Once you understand the rules, the world starts making way more sense, and you realize that these traps aren't accidents. They are the result of seemingly rational people following their interests in a system that is not designed for self-centered decisions. In a zero-sum game like chess or football, for me to win, you have to lose. But in the real world, if you want to win long-term, you need to follow a different set of rules. A Nash equilibrium creates stability because any unilateral self-centered move often makes the mover worse off in the long run. But is that stability necessarily a good thing? Have you ever wondered why Burger King is almost always directly across the street from a McDonald's? It feels like bad planning, doesn't it? You'd think they would spread out to serve more people, but they don't. And this is a classic case of a Nash equilibrium. Competition can create a race to the center where rivals slowly become the same. By the way, that race to the center is called Hotelling's law. It feels like a lazy way to compete. And who even benefits? Imagine a mile-long beach with two ice cream carts. At first, they might start at opposite ends to split the crowd. But eventually, one cart realizes they can steal some of the other guy's customers by moving just a little bit closer to the middle. Then the other cart does the same. They keep inching toward each other until they're back to back in the exact center of the beach. Mathematically, they have reached a state where neither can move without losing customers. But the problem is, they aren't trying to be convenient for you. They are just competing for every single person on that beach. And this is why gas stations cluster. You have 4 gas stations at one intersection and nothing for the next 5 miles. The same thing happens in fast food. McDonald spends millions on data to find the optimal spot. But Burger King does their research too. So not to miss out, they simply open a store across the street. By doing this, they ensure they don't lose any market share to a competitor who's done the homework and found the sweet spot. That's what the race to the center is. But very often, companies stop trying to be unique and start trying to be just not worse than their rivals.
When we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, there's a few very predictable and consistent outcomes: the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, the decline of innovation, and the eventual demise of the organization itself.
They're playing a game where the strategy is to minimize the risk of being left out, even if it means sacrificing the innovation for the entire system. But what's the harm? Well, if Burger King and McDonald's dominate an intersection, what happens to the local diner that's been on that intersection for 30 years? They can't play the same game, they can't relocate, they can't outspend on marketing, can't survive 6 months of price wars. So when the chains move in with their seemingly identical offers, they starve the surrounding areas of oxygen needed for innovation. The Nash equilibrium doesn't just produce boring products, it acts as a filter that only the largest, most identical players can pass through. So if the world is just a collection of mistrust, betrayal, stalemates, what do you even do? What you do is change the time horizon. You see, the rules we've discussed so far, the one-off betrayals or the race to the center, change the moment you realize the game doesn't end today but will continue into perpetuity. In 1980, a political scientist, Robert Axelrod, wanted to find the ultimate strategy for navigating this. He organized a massive computer tournament and invited the world's leading experts to submit programs that would play the prisoner's dilemma against each other thousands of times over and over again. He expected some complex, sneaky, high-level algorithm to come out on top, something designed to lie, cheat, and exploit. But the winner was the simplest program in the entire tournament, written in just a few lines of code. It was called Tit-For-Tat.
Well, I was pretty surprised. I expected, as in chess, that it would take real sophistication to do well in this game. So I was really surprised when the simplest of all did best.
The strategy was very simple. On the very first move, you're always nice. You don't betray first by default. But after that, you just do whatever your opponent did the last time. If they're nice to you, you're nice to them. But if they betray you, you betray back immediately. But if they apologize and start cooperating again, you forgive them and go back to being friends. No hard feelings, just logic. Axelrod ran thousands of tests, and most of the top strategies were nice. They weren't the first to betray. But the winning strategies weren't just nice. They were nice, but with teeth and clarity. What Axelrod discovered is that you had to be more than just good. You never betray at first, yes, because that triggers endless retaliation, but you must also be provocable. You cannot be a doormat. If someone crosses a boundary, you must retaliate immediately so they know they cannot exploit you. But then, you must be forgiving. If they understand they crossed the boundary, the moment they return to cooperation, you let go of the grudge and keep the positive-sum game alive. Simple enough, right? But as I said earlier, there was one last critical component. Your behavior had to be clear and predictable, so people knew exactly how to play with you without getting scared into the betrayal mode just to be safe.
This pattern of being nice, but being retaliatory, being forgiving, and being clear in the rules drives all the other strategies into extinction.
Essentially, it's the strategy of building a strong relationship by proving that you are a reliable ally, but also an ally that is very dangerous to cross. Don't you think Amazon resembles a version of the Tit-For-Tat system? If a seller cooperates, makes customers happy, the algorithm rewards them with a featured offer or buy box and other perks. But if you betray Amazon by shipping late or faking reviews, the relationship changes very quickly. When performance drops, sellers' eligibility can be reduced or lost. And if you don't innovate as an Amazon seller, someone else would take your spot before the entire marketplace settles into a Nash equilibrium and everyone stops improving. Because nobody has to. Essentially, it's almost as if a digital version of Axelrod's tournament would be forcing thousands of competitors out of a vicious cycle of stagnation and betrayal. What that also tells us is that, contrary to some recent global trends, game theory suggests that unpredictability is not a long-term winning strategy for anybody involved in the game. The optimal Tit-For-Tat strategy wins because it isn't trying to beat the other person. It is trying to teach them that cooperation is in their own best interest. By the late 1980s, after decades of building enough weapons to end the world, the United States and the Soviet Union finally did something unexpected. They started disarming.
It was a simple proposal, one might say disarmingly simple.
They didn't do it because they suddenly became best friends. They did it because they changed the rules of the game. Instead of one giant, terrifying all-or-nothing choice, they broke the process down into tiny, yearly steps. They disarmed a few missiles at a time, checked to make sure the other side did the same, and then repeated the process. They realized a fundamental truth of game theory. When you're playing a repeated game over and over again, your reputation is your only real currency. Axelrod in his book called this the shadow of the future. We cooperate with others not because we're inherently good creatures, but we are social creatures. We know that in many cases we may need to see that person again tomorrow. Or maybe we'll interact with somebody that person knows. In a small tribe, if our ancestors cheated once and the whole group found out, the cheater could very well end up dying alone.
Because of the threat of future punishment, we're able to get the really good payoff that comes with cooperation.
But thousands of years later, nothing has really changed. And this is the ultimate lesson of game theory. And it applies to social life, politics, business. Life is a never-ending game of adaptation. The lone wolf who tries to win by exploiting others might get a small victory today, but as we've already seen, they're mathematically destined to be at a long-term disadvantage, not just to themselves, but to the whole group. The winners, the ones who dominate their markets and build lasting empires, are the ones who forge strong alliances, who signal power and substance, and who create positive-sum environments where everyone's pie gets bigger. Remember those two bank robbers from the beginning? They could have walked away in 1 year if they had just trusted each other. But experiment after experiment shows that betrayal remains the default choice in the majority of scenarios. What's interesting is that every day we, as business owners, face very similar choices governed by game theory. The math doesn't change and neither do the rules, but success in business isn't about being good at math or knowing all the rules. It's about understanding the game you're being forced to play. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the channel, please consider subscribing and see you in the next video.